guest on the line right now, top Strikeforce and Invicta FC fighter Liz Carmouche. Liz, welcome to BJ10.com Radio. You're on the line with Mitch, Ciccarelli, and Bryan, Levick. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
We're doing fantastic. We're just dominating the world. And the first thing I want to ask you, because I know you were scheduled to fight Olympic silver medalist Sara McMann at what would have been Strikeforce Cormier versus Mir next week. Unfortunately, that entire event got canceled, and McMann also suffered a foot injury. Strikeforce is now talking about doing a huge show in January, and they're talking about doing multiple title fights. Is there any chance we'll see you on that card, possibly against McMann or somebody else?
Yeah, I'm really hoping that I'll be on that fight, and maybe even possibly, if McMahon's still injured, that I'd be in the running to go up against Rousey.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing I wanted to ask you too, because I know you were pushing for that Ronda fight. You know, when McMann got injured, you were really pushing it on Twitter. You're like, everyone tweet Strikeforce, let them know I want to fight Ronda Rousey. And of course, they weren't able to get a short notice replacement because they just canceled the whole event. But how do you see yourself matching up with somebody like Ronda Rousey when that fight comes to fruition in the future?
I'm hoping it'll be a great matchup. I mean, that's always the plan, is that you give a great show for the fans and represent the women in the best way possible, and just always with a positive outcome. And I definitely hope that.
Liz, there's been a lot of talk lately, especially this past week with Dana White, talking about definitely having women in the octagon. Just wanted to get your thoughts about that, and how soon do you think we could see that come about?
Hopefully soon. I'm hoping that maybe January will be the segue into something new, and maybe we'll be able to represent, instead of the Strikeforce, but maybe as the UFC and the first women's fight happening. And I don't know. I hope that happens. I'm looking forward to the possibilities.
And obviously, that's the destination that everybody would like to go to. But Invicta's been making a lot of headlines. They put on 3 great shows so far. Seems like each one has gotten better than the show before. They're supposed to be putting on a show, I believe, at the end of January, early February. Have you been in contact with them at all, or are you just waiting on the Strikeforce card?
I'm definitely having to wait on Strikeforce. They did let me know that when November happened, that because I do have an agreement with them and I have a contract, to be on hold and be ready for that. So I'm on standby for January with Strikeforce, and I'm thinking that's where it's going to go.
Now, there were a lot of rumors, when Strikeforce initially canceled this event, because it was their second fight card that they had to cancel within the span of a month. A lot of people were saying Strikeforce is done, they're going to fold, and of course that ended up not being true. What do you think is in store for the future of Strikeforce? Do you think they're going to, recover from this and get back to doing what they've been doing, which has been putting on great fight cards, or do you kind of see them maybe slowing down a little bit, and maybe we're going to see a Strikeforce merger with the UFC pretty soon?
I'm expecting a Strikeforce merger, and I mean, like we said earlier, everyone is their hope when they start out in MMA is to fight in the UFC, and it's definitely something I hope would happen for women's MMA, that eventually we would go to turn out to be in the biggest of big shows, and I certainly think that that's where Strikeforce is headed, is a merge into the UFC.
And speaking of the UFC, and as Bryan mentioned, Dana White has recently spoken openly about how a women's division is absolutely going to happen in the UFC pretty soon. I mean, it's something he's been warming up to recently, especially with the emergence of Ronda Rousey. How do you think it'll actually, how long do you think it'll actually happen before we start seeing the UFC promoting women's fights? And more importantly, do you think the UFC will promote a women's division correctly?
I absolutely think they will. They're really good about promoting all their divisions and really good about hyping up their fights and their fighters and standing behind them. So I think if they integrate a women's division, they'll be in full support with Rousey leading the way.
And Liz, you're competing at 145. Who would you, besides Ronda, would say are some of the top other fighters in your weight class?
I think whenever you see they come out with a poll for the top 5, top 10 fighters, those are definitely all represented in the 135 weight class for Strikeforce, and I certainly feel like those are the top women. With that being said, Marlos Conan, Ronda Rousey, Sara McMann, Miesha Tate, I think all those women are definitely the top fighters that I would certainly look forward to competing against.
All right, and then just going back to Rousey a little bit, if the two of you did, happen to meet up, how do you see the fight going down? Where do you feel you hold advantages over her?
I think experience when it comes to fighting is going in my advantage. I definitely see it going hopefully a lot longer than everybody else's. I always look for a quick finish. I know she does, but I'd like to give a show for the fans that lasts a little bit longer than just the first round, and for both of our fights, because I know both of us like to finish it a little bit early, and I'd like to see it go longer.
Now, you mentioned that you're kind of waiting to hear word from Strikeforce about your next fight. But if you look at it, if you look at the top 135-pound fighters in the Invicta FC, I mean, you can make a case that yourself and Sara McMann could fight each other for that Invicta FC, that first title, that first 135-pound title for that organization. Would that be something that'd be more interesting to you, or would you prefer fighting McMann on like a bigger show like Strikeforce?
I loved representing Invicta, and I had thought that McMann and I would be competing originally in Invicta for the title there, and then both of us possibly competing against Rousey for a title in Strikeforce and ultimately holding two titles. Seeing as that didn't happen and there hasn't been any talk of the title for Invicta, I would definitely want the opportunity to go for against Rousey for the title in Strikeforce.
And, speaking of Invicta, they've had 3 awesome, amazing shows this year. You competed on 2 out of those 3. You won both of those fights. I wanted to ask you, and I'm a huge advocate of Invicta. I probably get more excited for an Invicta event than I do most UFCs. A lot of people think I'm crazy for that. But if Dana starts promoting women's mixed martial arts, is that a positive or a negative for Invicta in the long run?
I can see it being both. One thing that Invicta has as an advantage over Strikeforce and over the UFC is they have more weight classes, and they give opportunities to up-and-coming fighters, whereas the UFC and Strikeforce, you don't really do your debut fights in those big organizations. You already have to have fights. So Invicta is great about, we have these talented women who've made just wonderful, extensive careers as amateurs, and when they turn pro, by the time they get there, they really represent themselves as professionals. And that's one thing that I think Invicta has over the UFC. So if they open up the weight divisions, then they'll definitely have some competition. But as long as the UFC is only thinking about keeping the 135 division, I think Invicta still has a strong standing.
And speaking, I just want to get your opinion on one fighter that should be making her way back pretty soon. That's Cyborg. Do you feel that she'll be able to get down to 135 and compete with Ronda? And do you feel that having her back is a positive or a negative for the sport?
I think with anything like the way that she unfortunately had to take a break from fighting, with anything like that, it's going to have its negatives. But at the same time, just like Rousey's done, where everything she says has brought drama to the sport and brought people's interest, I think Cyborg's going to do the same thing. People want to see what she can do next, so that's going to bring fans in and have people watching just to see what's going to happen. But as far as her making it down to 135, it seems like in the past sometimes she's struggled to get to 145, so I think it's going to be really difficult for her large frame to be able to make it to 135.
All right, Liz, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us anything else you got going on. Thank any sponsors, any teammates, any trainers, your management company. We appreciate you coming on the show. Next time we have you on, hopefully you'll have a fight and we can get onto that subject.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I'd love to. I want to thank Alchemist Management and my gym, San Diego Combat Academy. We now have 2 locations. And sponsors like Swole, Build and Destroy, I just want to say thank you so much, as well as Ranger Up and Sacred Savage. And I also want to say that, Ronda, I know we've talked about it before on Twitter and on Facebook, and I just hope that you'll take me into consideration as your next opponent to be a contender for that belt.
Absolutely. Well, Liz, we appreciate having you on the show, and I'd love to see that fight between you and Ronda Rousey. I think that's a fight where you're going to get right in her face, she's going to get right in yours, and we're going to see a fantastic matchup. Have a great night, and keep on kicking ass, my friend.